Welcome to the Stop Digging Community Podcast, powered by the nonprofit A² Lamp Groups. I'm Christina, a joyful founding board member since 2014. Your truly unique self-development journey begins today with the first step. Stop digging.
Hello, everyone. I am Chris, the new host of the A² Community Podcast, along with my co-host, Susan. Today, we have a very special guest, at least to me, because this is one of my best friends in the world. His name is James Dascoli. He is the owner, founder of the Sedona Shepherd Rescue, the treasurer, and he also owns a dog training business. So we're going to get a really interesting perspective on how people start a nonprofit and some of the challenges and some of the excitement about doing that. So please welcome Jim.
Thank you, Chris. It's great to be here. Excited to talk about Sedona Shepherd Sanctuary. We are a rescue that focuses primarily on adult and senior German Shepherds, and I founded it back in 2014. It's a passion project for me, so to speak, and it's something that really speaks to my heart.
Why shepherds?
Everyone's got to pick their breed, right? If you go to our website and you look at the About Us, there's a picture of me as a 10-week-old child and a 100-pound German Shepherd next to me. So I've grown up with German Shepherds all of my life. When I was young, we had 3 German Shepherds by the time I was 22. And then around the time that I was 30 or so, my wife and I adopted our first 2 German Shepherds, and it went from there. So I've always been very attached to that particular breed.
I love that because both your business and your nonprofit focus on your passion, your love for dogs. So thanks for sharing that.
Sure.
So your origin story seems pretty clear. You had a love for German Shepherds, and I know this well since I spent a lot of time over at Jim's house around his German Shepherds. So Jim, what is some of the challenges that you face when starting a rescue?
Sure. Now, luckily, I had spent 5 years as president of Garden State German Shepherd Rescue, which at the time was the largest German Shepherd rescue in New Jersey. When I took it over, we were averaging about 20 to 25 shepherds a year, and the average age of the dogs that we were adopting at was about 18 months. By the time that I left, we were doing about 60 to 62 German Shepherds a year that we had rescued, and I increased the age to about 4 or 4.5 years. I learned a lot over the 6 years that I was either an officer or a board member with Garden State. I learned some of the positives of running a rescue and some of the drawbacks. There's a lot that I took from that when I decided to eventually start Sedona Shepherd Sanctuary. I took about 6 months off in between. And then from there, I gathered a small group of people that I really trusted, that understood the focus should be on rescuing dogs, having a good relationship actually with the individuals within the group, being able to interact with humans. I know it's, you do dog rescue, you rescue dogs, you spend all this time with dogs, but it's a human endeavor. If you can't interact well with humans, if you can't have a good relationship with humans, your rescue is not going to be successful. So since 2014, we expanded. I always wanted to help and focus on adult and senior dogs. They're the hardest dogs to get adopted, and they're usually one of the first dogs that are going to get euthanized at a shelter. So it's an area that definitely has a high need. I don't say anybody. Most people can get puppies adopted. Getting an 8-year-old German Shepherd, there's a challenge to that, and there's an excitement when you get that dog adopted and it gets into its new home.
I'm a little surprised that there are so many German Shepherds as a breed, just specifically that are in that category.
Right.
Why do you think that is?
Sometimes the breeds can be related to movies, right? Or what's popular. There was a time when a lot of Huskies were popping up. Like right now in shelters, you're starting to see a lot of Cane Corsos. We do see a fair amount of Pit Bulls. And as far as Shepherds, they've always consistently been very, very attractive dogs for people to adopt. They're great family dogs. They're also military working dogs. They're just very regal looking. So there's always been a demand for German Shepherds, sometimes a little bit more if there's a good movie about them out, sometimes a little bit less, but it's pretty consistent. As far as older dogs, the past couple of years for us, a lot of people have died and we've ended up with their dogs. And not all of those people have been older. Taken in a lot of dogs from people that were in their 50s or 60s that passed away suddenly, that didn't really make arrangements, or their families didn't make arrangements, or they had family members that had other dogs and the shepherds weren't dog friendly. So we've seen a lot of that. And the economics can play a role in that as well. I know there's this thought like, oh, people get rid of older dogs and get puppies, but that's rarely the case.
When you were talking about starting your nonprofit, in response to Chris's question, you said that you learned a lot from your previous experience about the pluses and the minuses of doing that. What were some of the pluses and what were some of the minuses?
Well, when we started Sedona Shepherd, and I think it's important for anybody that starts an organization, but especially a nonprofit organization, you have to spend a lot of time and think about how you want to manage that, how it's going to be structured. So when we were with Garden State German Shepherd Rescue, initially it was very top heavy. There was about 4 members that did most of the work. And it led to a lot of the volunteers not really feeling that they had a lot of buy-in. When I became president, we really tried to expand that. We really tried to get more people involved. Now, there's a positive to that, obviously. The downside to that is our organization wasn't structured properly as far as the officers go. We had elections every year. Really, if you're going to do profit and you're going to have officers via elections, it should be at least 2 to 3 years. It can cause a lot of stress. There's competition there a lot of times, and you just become the president, and 9 months later, it's quote unquote running for president again. So it can be top down, but you can also be top down and making sure that your volunteers are very much more engaged. So that was my focus. We've had more or less the same officers, so to speak, over the 10 years, but we've had a lot of new volunteers, and we found ways to make sure that we're integrating the volunteers into our program where they feel confident that their input is going to be heard. And most importantly, one of the biggest lessons I learned is don't ask volunteers to do something that you feel needs to get done. You have to ask volunteers to do things that they want to do. Ultimately, the officers and the board members, they're the ones that are going to do the grunt work anyway. If someone comes on and they say, you know what, I love doing technology, or I love doing Instagram, or I love doing the finance and I love working with the books, then that's great. But you can throw out projects and see if people have an interest in it. But you really have to let the volunteers do what they enjoy. And then whatever left over is the officers need to pick up that, which a lot of times is grunt work, but that's okay. It needs to get done.
I love that.
I think that's an important piece to it, is to recognize that when people are volunteering, they want to enjoy what they're doing. They've got to be driven by it. I think that's an important point. You talk about that kind of balance between, look, hopefully you would all share a love for dogs, maybe particularly in this case, German Shepherds, but it's working. I think the human angle is really what you're saying, is the importance, or one of the key factors of creating a great rescue would be really being able to work with people well, and particularly people who are volunteering their time.
Sure.
That's essentially what I think I heard.
Yes. Yeah, without a doubt. Without a doubt. And everybody needs to be on the same page. I've mostly worked with animal rescue as far as nonprofit goes. I was in music ministry for my church, which is obviously completely different. But one thing with human dog rescues is there can be a lot of drama. There's no other way around it. The bottom line, there can be a lot of drama. So you want to make sure that the volunteers aren't driven by drama and don't get enjoyment out of the drama, that they ultimately understand. We're here to rescue dogs, and we're here to have fun, right? We're here to enjoy each other's company. It's not a competition. People are going to make mistakes. You need to be graceful. You can't get on people. If we do an application and it seems, it's going to be a great application, and then we adopt the dog out and it turns out it didn't work out, right? I'm not going to get on. If there was a lead person that was involved with that, we'll review to see what happened. They're doing the best that they can. You can't come down hard on people, especially in volunteer work.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, if, you want to be able to have a sense of grace about you when things don't go quite the way you want. And that would happen even if you had hired a full-time employee. There are going to be some things that just don't work out the way it is. So I think the idea of, I think that's kind of getting that people all aligned to your vision and what you're trying to do is probably the critical piece to that. So it sounds like there's a real importance between the people skills, and then you also have to have dog skills.
Yes.
Right?
I'm curious too, how do you fire a volunteer and still feel like you haven't ruined an advocacy, bringing a bad reputation on your nonprofit? Like when you're like, sorry, you got to go. How do you, that happened?
Luckily, it's never happened at Sedona Shepherd Sanctuary.
Good.
It did happen at Garden State German Shepherd Rescue. And it was a very painful experience because the person that eventually we had to let go as a volunteer, there's just a lot of stuff that they were saying behind people's back. And then fortunately for us, because we could keep track of it, people forget that if you send an email, right, someone else can forward that email and you can find out what was said. And you have that evidence to show them. As I said, it was a painful experience, but they understood where we were coming from and they didn't really cause a lot of problems anymore. But yes, that's where at Sedona Shepherd, we don't just take on any volunteer. We need to get to know them. We need to get to know them not extremely well, but have a good sense of who they are. Usually people will come to us either via they know us through our Facebook or social media. I've been in rescue for so long that a lot of people already know me. And sometimes it'll be someone who knew me from 10 years ago when I was president of Garden State. And they're like, hey, I remember when you were president and you adopted this dog to me and that dog passed away recently and really want to get involved. So I try to get to know the folks beforehand. And then once we know them and get a good feel for who they are, then we'll start giving them responsibility.
Okay,
so the screening process is important. Yeah. So
the thing that comes to my mind, and forgive the pun, listeners, but you have to vet your volunteers.
Yes.
So that's important because it's all about relationship, right? And
yes.
And Chris, our host for Stop Digging podcast here, he's passionate about leadership, and this year he's embarking on. Again, the pun, embarking on. Right. He's getting...
She just can't help herself.
I'm on today. Embarking on what's called the leadership factor. And you've already talked just in the first 10 minutes here about the importance of leadership consistency for success and now, relationship. Vetting your volunteers in particular. I don't know if you vet your volunteers the same way as your staff, but
the board member, for the most part, the board members and the officers. Yeah, it's a 501c3, so it's an unpaid. We're all volunteers, one way or the other. The board members were all via somebody that one of the officers already knew. The president, Lisa Fardella, I've known her back from Garden State German Shepherd Rescue. In fact, she fostered a dog that I ended up adopting. And so I've known her for, I don't know, probably 15 years. And we're always on the same wavelength, right? We always understand each other. We're constantly texting each other. We don't read into text messages. And if there's something that we're a little unsure about what do we mean by the text, we'll call each other. We know each other so long. We're not going to make mistakes with each other. Our secretary, Jim Silverstein, also, he is a prior adopter. And then so each of us had recommended a different board member. So we know the board members as well. And we get along. That's important, as I said, that we get along.
I want to point out something that you said that I experienced in corporate. So I think I just put a kind of point on this.
Sure.
And that is, if an email I have this joke that says, don't send the third email when somebody says something else. If you're going to send that third email that's going to escalate it, you should call them. And that's an important thing that you just brought up, was that is the kind of problem that can happen. And if you're worried about a miscommunication, pick up the phone and talk to them. And for some people, that's hard. So it might require a little bit of courage to be able to do that. But it's much better than the strain of, no, you said this, and it going crazy. And I just have a story. I don't know if I shared this story before, but when I was working in corporate, I had somebody sent me something and I sent something back and they're like, bah, and it went all the way up. And I went to my boss and I was just like, what should I do here? And she goes, the person is three desks down from you. Maybe you want to go talk to them. I'm like, oh, that's a good idea. So it's important to understand that's a great concept for people to understand, whether you're running a charity or you're involved in a multinational corporation. So
yeah, even from Yeah, leadership skills. A lot of people know the story about Lincoln, right? When he was really ticked off during the Civil War and he wanted to just can a general or just let loose, he would write a pretty long letter and he just put it in his desk and then get back to it a day or two later. And if he the same way, then he would send it off. So same thing applies today.
So maybe that next leadership factor thing is to go into your email settings and
Right.
go and delay your email send by 30 minutes or something like that, just so you don't send that critical email that's going to get you in trouble.
Yeah, one time I posted a picture. I had fostered this dog, Hugo. He was an amazing dog. He was actually a young dog. He was an Akita Mastiff mix. And there's a picture of his head's like right over here, over my shoulder. And then I put a little caption next to it and I said, where it's coming from Hugo. It's, are you sure you want to send that tweet? So I remember that often. I don't tweet.
Well, everyone says yes until someone else comments. So it's that reality check.
Yeah, definitely.
Sounds like just starting this rescue, you've learned a lot in your own, maybe let's say leadership style, or how to, I'd say dealing with volunteers is one thing, right? Because you're trying to get them on board. So how do you bring some of these ideas when you're working with someone that you're going to vet? So I know you're dealing with older dogs, and what's that process look like? And
do you mean vet a dog, like temperament test a dog and determine if a dog's coming in, or do you mean regarding a potential adopter, or both? I can obviously cover both.
I think maybe both might be good. I was thinking about the human factor first, but I would assume that the dog factor is rather critical also.
So in regards to the dogs that come into our program, we don't have any issues taking in dogs that have health issues. We do have to draw the line as far as behavioral issues go. We have to understand what can we do and what can't we do. Sadly, also, insurance does play a role. I know that there's one or two German Shepherd rescues that had to close. I'm friends with the folks because they couldn't get insurance anymore. So when we're determining a dog that comes into our program, there's three options. One, we can go down to the shelter and meet a dog. The second one is an owner referral, where an owner will apply to let us list their dog while they keep the dog. And then the third is the owner surrender, where the owner surrenders the dog to us. There's something called the Sue Sternberg temperament test. We modify it, but the basic gist is we can't take in a dog that's going to be aggressive towards humans. Right. We can take in a dog that might not get along with other dogs, which is about 25 to 30% of the German Shepherds anyway. If they're going to aggress towards humans, or if you go towards their food bowl and they try to bite you, that's just not the dog that we can take in. There's a couple of volunteers in our organization that can evaluate the dogs, but ultimately, I'm the one who decides what dogs come in to the program. If we go down to the shelter, we try to get as much information as possible. Sometimes they're just strays. I have great relationships with almost all the shelters that we work with in New Jersey. So I tend to the folks there because they know I'm not going to, even if we take in a dog and it turns out that the dog's aggressive, we will keep the dog in our program. I'm not going to tell a shelter we'll take a dog and then turn around and be like, nah, I can't take the dog. If I say I'll take it, we'll take the dog. So I have a good relationship there. With owners, you have to tease it out. We do have an application form that people fill out. I tend to ask people first, if I'm speaking to them over the phone, oh, is your dog, do they have other dog friends? How do they interact with other dogs? And eventually I'll get to asking them about how the dogs interact with humans. If that's my first question, they're going to key off of that. And they're probably not going to tell me the truth that the dog just bit 3 kids, right? And then the owner referrals, like I said, sometimes we'll try to keep the dogs with the owner as long as possible. And other times we'll take the dog directly into our program.
How much is this is codified as like an administrative, like a manual that everyone has to follow within your organization?
It could be more codified. I'll admit that. We will see, often what you do in life is going to be a reaction to what you had done in the past. So to go to a sports analogy, right? If you have a coach that's a player's coach, right? The next coach is going to come in, he's going to kick butt and take names, or vice versa. So when we were with Garden State, I think we over codified things. With us, we do have, like, for instance, when we're evaluating potential adopters, that's completely codified. We have, as I said, for dogs, we have the specific tests and it is written down, but The ultimate decision with a dog is going to be if they're going to be aggressive. That's definitely codified. When when we have folks applying to us, that's codified as well. There's an application. They have to provide us with a vet reference, 2 personal references. Then we do an interview, home visit, and then we have them meet the dogs. Sometimes the interview and home visit is done at the same time. In 2019, 2020, we try to stay a little ahead of the curve. So we started to do home visits virtually a lot earlier than I think a lot of other rescues did, even before there was COVID. And that allowed us to service all of New Jersey. Sometimes we have volunteers throughout the state, and sometimes more of our volunteers are in northern New Jersey, right? So if we get an application, which is in Cape May, New Jersey, which is as far south as you can possibly get, and I'm in Millburn, which is about 2 hours away, it's hard to do a physical home visit. That's 5 hours out of my day. So we sometimes we'll do, as I said, we'll do the virtual. So that aspect is all that's codified. But we tried to have some flexibility. Like we'll say the average age is 25. The adoption age is 25 to 70. We've adopted to folks that have been over 80. We just ask that they contact us first. And there's some certain things that they have to do, right? They have to have a plan in place if something happens to the dog. We want to make sure that we match up a dog that they can physically handle. But I don't want to be so rigid in our rules. So there's a fair amount of flexibility. But as I said, for dogs coming into our program, we can't take in dogs that are aggressive towards humans. That's a hard rule.
So I have a question again. You're stationed out of New Jersey, but I noticed that your shelter your nonprofit name is Sedona.
Right. Yes.
So I'm curious about how that came. Is it
Sure.
Another passion place that you just wanted to connect with, or is it some other reason?
Well, luckily I can tell this story now without tearing up, but for the first 5 years, it was difficult. Back in 2004, when I first joined Garden State German Shepherd Rescue, and I first became involved with rescue, I went out to a shelter and I was meeting some volunteers. It was the first time I was going to evaluate a dog. And in the rescue world, we don't go on military time, we go on rescue time, which means all the other volunteers are about to show up an hour late. And so I get there and there's like a 3-year-old shepherd we were supposed to evaluate. I get there and there's this like older white shepherd and there's a sign that says not for adoption. And when I grew up, I had a white shepherd attached to them and she was really sad looking and thin, and I didn't really think too much of it, but I had nothing better to do. So I talked to the shelter manager. I'm like, oh, can I take the dog out? It says not up for adoption. Do you have the owner? Is the owner coming back? And the shelter manager said, no, we think she was hit by a car. Police brought her in 6 days ago. Her stray hold is up tomorrow. In New Jersey, it's 7 days. They have to hold a dog if it's a stray. It's an older dog, not in great health. No one shows up at the end of the day. Today, we're going to euthanize her tomorrow. And you can imagine, like, what? You can imagine how I reacted to that. So I said, oh, let me take the dog out. So we took her out. She's a very sweet dog. She was bunny hopping with the back feet. And then I talked to my wife for an hour and I guilted her into letting me take her home. So I arranged to take her home the next day, get her checked up with our vet, and we agreed. If there was nothing that we could do for her, we would keep her for a couple of weeks and then we would humanely euthanize her ourselves. But let's at least give her that chance. And we had her for over 2.5 years. I originally was going to name her Phoenix, and my wife said, no, she's much a softer dog. Like Phoenix is it's too action oriented. And I was like, all right, how about Sedona? Sedona's a beautiful town in Arizona. And she's like, yeah. So we named her Sedona. And that's how I ended up naming this rescue Sedona Shepherd Sanctuary. It's in honor of the first senior dog that I ever adopted, and the dog that was very true to my heart and often gave me tears telling the story. Yeah, so that's how we ended up. And yeah, Sedona is a beautiful town. So I've been there before.
It's funny, as you were talking, it's been years now for us. I think I also had a white German Shepherd mix that she was rescued. She was very young, and we didn't know she was a German Shepherd. I think when we found her, she was like 5 weeks old. She was just a tiny little thing. So we just thought, oh, she's so cute and little. And we took her home, adopted her, and she just kept getting bigger and bigger. And then at 3 months, we were like, oh my gosh, this dog is like going to be huge. Her paws were just huge. We made the mistake of not training her. She loved us. We loved her, but no one else did. So the fact that you actually are also a trainer speaks to my heart, because we had to train her, but she was so used to sleeping in our bed, being picked up. German Shepherds with their paws.
Right.
Everything was ripped, had mud on it. It was terrible. Right. And she was also clever too. So she found the one part in our yard that she would bark and it would echo and rattle our windows. There was a lot of annoyance in that too, but we did love her. But tell us more about this training that you have and that you do. And do you only do it with German Shepherds or your own stuff?
No, I train any dog. And by the way, behind me, that's a picture. I know it's a little far behind, but that's the picture of Sedona. So she's on the website, of course. Yeah, so the training, what I do is I train any breed from puppy to adults. Probably about 40% of the dogs that I train are puppies. The rest are adults. I will train some dogs from shelters, and if a shelter asks for help, I definitely will help them out.
Hello, friends. Thanks for listening. A² Lamp Groups powers this podcast. Their memberships are tax-deductible donations that directly support their work developing people and organizations. But just for you, they're offering podcast listeners a special 40% off coupon code to join. Your benefits as a member include additional resources, perks, and access that you can use all year, including an additional 30 minutes of bonus podcast content for every episode. Simply use the code 4listeners at checkout. That's the number 4, all caps, listeners at checkout. They also are giving our listeners free gifts to use now. Go to their website, asquaredlamps.org/podcast, and download your free My Success Course of Action worksheet. There is no cost, registration, or sales pitch involved. Just click it and save. Use it to work on something significant to you this month, maybe even something that sparks interest from today's podcast. Then click to join our free but private Stop Digging Podcast LinkedIn group, where the conversation continues between you, the hosts, and our guests. Don't forget to subscribe and share this podcast with your friends. And now, back to the program.
My main goal when training a dog is I want to build a great relationship between the dog and the owner. If it's an elevator pitch and someone's asking you what you do, I know it can sound a little pretentious. I train people that have great relationships with their dog, but it is true. That's exactly what I do. It's really, I think most halfway decent trainers can teach a dog to sit, to do down, to stay, right? Those are fairly easy, right? But I need to make sure that the owners understand how to communicate to a dog in a manner that the dog's going to understand. Too often, humans try to communicate to dogs the way they think humans understand. And that causes really the disconnect between a dog and a human. And that causes the majority of the problems because we're trying to interact and we humanize dogs a little bit too much. And to me, that's a mistake. And the dog can suffer for that. And your relationship can suffer for that as well.
I know for sure that we've humanized our dogs. We're talking for them. Yeah. Ziggy is saying this. Zoe is saying that. It's really weird, just in general sense that you're speaking for your dogs. We also 2 rescue dogs that we adopted during the pandemic, and I think that was a great thing for our family. Very helped out the kids quite a bit. Helped out just the family in general. James, I have to say, the one thing. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
The one thing I always
say, it's important when I'm working with a client to understand like what their goals are and not to, like I say, yes, it's important for humans to understand how to communicate with dogs, right? But it's also important for me to understand what my client actually wants. And I'm not going to go in there and tell them, oh, you got to do A, B, and C if it's not relevant to if they have a particular problem, right? Let's say that, oh, the main issue is my dog doesn't walk right on the leash. I'm not going to come in there and say, I don't think your dog should be on the bed or should be doing this or doing that, right? And if they're talking lovey-dovey to their dog and it has no negative consequences to the main issue that I'm trying to fix, I'm not going to change that. It's important to understand what your client wants, not try to go in there with a mindset of, hey, it has to be this way, and this is the only way you can train a dog, or this is the only way, your dog's going to have great behavior.
I
Sorry.
think that's an important point. The thing I wanted to say was it's that the idea of that kind of mission statement for yourself to make people have a great relationship with their dog, I think is just a fantastic message for people to hear, because really that's what you want. We're very fortunate. We have a great relationship with our dog. They're going to sleep on the bed and they're going to jump up and they're going to do certain things that we're okay with. And if, like you said, if a trainer came in and says, oh, you shouldn't do that, we'd be like, huh? Your reaction would be, that's not what you want. So I think this is a very important thing also for people to learn, is having a little bit of flexibility and not just in dog training, in the way that you comport yourself, either in business or even in your personal life. Being extraordinarily rigid and it can only be done way can often lead to conflict. So I think it's an important thing for people to hear, not just in dog training, out and then outside of that.
That's like leadership boundaries, but it occurred to me that you're both trainers. True. Chris trained people, and I don't even know what all the parallels are, but maybe you guys can talk about it. Chris, when you're training people, I guess you have to have boundaries as well, at least on some level. Trust, communication, not overly administrate your training. And probably the same thing with you, Jim, is I don't know if there are other similarities, but...
Right. Chris and I have talked a little bit about some of the terminology and the language that we use. I think it's important to make sure that you don't come across as judgmental and be cognizant of the words that you use. When I'm working with a client, they'll say, oh, my dog's bad, or, oh, that's the wrong thing to do. It's a bad dog, or it's a bad... You put these moral judgments, these value judgments on words, and then you create a lot of guilt toward yourself. Or if you're a trainer, you create guilt in your particular client, right? And so I really try to get to people to focus on, hey, is it a wanted behavior or is it an unwanted behavior? And when you focus on using terms like that, you're gonna set your client up for a better frame of mind and more likely be successful, because they're not beating themselves up over, am I doing it right? Is this the wrong way to do it? Am I being a bad pet owner? Right. And it's the same thing, I'm sure, with Chris. We've talked about don't include non-value items when you're having discussions with people. That's, to me, extremely important, just trying to make sure you're not being judgmental.
That was one of the things I learned specifically from James, is taking out non-value added comments. So why'd you do that? What is it doing? Can you explain to me what your thought process was? Is a little different than why did you do that? So it's understanding that, especially if you want to build any rapport with people. And I think for James in particular, he has two things. One, he has to build rapport with people when he's obviously adopting a dog out, but also when he's trying to get a client. Like, the last thing you want to do is come across as, yeah, you guys are totally screwed up. That's just not to get clients. Be like, well, this guy's a real jerk face. They're going to go off to someone else.
Right. So I can't believe you did that to your dog. What, are you kidding me?
What? Yeah, exactly. I mean, they're going to do it. Like,
you're the only one in the whole world that does that. Yeah. So I love hearing about this, because that's leadership trust, and it's not just leadership trust with your own tribe, your own board members, or your volunteers that are curated into your organization, or your staff, if you have staff. It's also the people that you're working with, building that trust, because they got to trust the trainer. Are there some things that you do, Chris, when you're training people that helps them to trust you more so you get more done?
I make them laugh.
That's a good strategy.
I got the microphone in the back. Look, if you want to break the ice, or I always tell people, what is the best way to connect with someone? And it's telling a compelling story that somebody else can buy into. But the fastest way to connect with people is if you can make them laugh. And so you can, that's why even if you start out with a joke that ends up bombing, people are like, well, at least he's trying. You never know if people are going to laugh at things all the time, but I think that's just using your sense of humor to do that. But that's not everybody's wheelhouse. So if you can just tell a compelling story and people would say, hey, this is like, so if Jim didn't have a sense of humor, which I know he does have, that whole idea of getting them into the mindset of like, look, I want you to have a great relationship with the dog. That's what drives me. And then you tell a story about how he was connected to a dog would be a great example. Like, I've had great relationships with my dogs for this, and I just want everybody else to experience that. That is something that you would hope the person that you're going to be working with is going to say, oh, I want that too. And there doesn't have to be a sense of humor around it. That's my trick anyway.
Sure. No, it's good. And you have to do what comes naturally to you. Sometimes I have a sense of humor, and sometimes people are like, "Oh, you're so serious." I was on a vacation once, and we were whitewater rafting, and I was like having an awesome time. But I can have a very intense look on me. Some of the folks on the whitewater rafting trip they asked my wife, they're like, "Is he having a good time?" And she's like, "Yes, he is." I do try to make sure that I smile a little bit more. One of the things that I wanted to talk about also in regards to running a shepherd or just leadership and interacting with people as well, it became a little bit more popular than it is now. I really did get into stoicism, and there's three pillars of stoicism that I really try to focus on in my life, which I think has helped me greatly, both with dealing with folks in the rescue organization as well as even my prior time in finance. The first is they call it the dichotomy of control. And that's just understanding what you can control and what you can control, very similar to the serenity prayer. Ultimately, you can only control your reactions, even your thoughts. It's not so much your thoughts, but what you do with your thoughts. The second aspect is understanding what they call impressions. And that is to make sure that you're not making a snap judgment. And I definitely want to come back to that in a moment because I have a pretty good story about that. And I really made a pretty big mistake once with someone that was trying to surrender their dog. And the third aspect that people really miss when we're dealing with stoicism, it's a cosmopolitan philosophy, right? A lot of times people think, oh, stoicism is just related to making yourself a better person and the heck with anybody else, just focus on yourself. And that's not true. If you read some of, say, what Marcus Aurelius talks about, here is the emperor of Rome, one of the most powerful people at that particular time. And he's sitting there talking about how men were made to work with each other and comparing our relationships with the different parts of the body. Those three pillars have really helped me a lot in regards to rescue. Talking about impressions, a long time ago when I was with Garden State, someone had called and it was an older gentleman. He had an older dog, and this is how I heard it, that he needed to get rid of his dog. And it was a long day for me. I was aggravated. And I'm just taking this another phone call of some jerk that wants to get rid of their dog. It's an older dog. He just wants to dump the dog. And I wasn't a total jerk to the guy, but I was pretty judgmental. I had a few things to say that I really shouldn't have said. And the guys responded. These, look, I have an older dog. I don't know what to do with the dog. I didn't call to be paraded or be yelled at, and then hung up on me. And I felt terrible about it. Because here's this guy, right? Older gentleman, didn't know what to do with his dog. Maybe he didn't have family that could help him out. And he's just turned into someone to try to help him out. And I'm just being the typical rescue jerk who's being judgmental and saying, oh, you've had this dog all your life. Why can't you take care of him at the end? I called him back. Like 10 minutes later, and I apologized. I said, it's not who I am. I understand that you're in a tough situation. I didn't mean to become judgmental about that. And I've always taken that ever since then. And you never know what people are going through, right? You don't understand. You can't make these snap judgments when people come to you and they're like, oh, I have to get rid of my dog because A, B, or C, right? You're never in that person's shoes. So don't respond to that first impression that you have. Give it some time, digest it. And even if you come up with the answer that they're being selfish, it's still not helping anybody if you're going to come across judgmental on it. Wait on that don't act on that first impression has really helped me a lot within the rescue organization and working with people from a training perspective as well.
Do you ever find yourself trying to change anybody's mind?
Not anymore. I did for a long time. But what I learned was if someone reaches out and they say, oh, I want to adopt a dog. Great. Okay, fine. We do mostly adult and senior shepherds, 5 years and older. And oh, I really want to get a puppy. I'm not going to talk someone out of getting a puppy. You want to get a puppy, get a puppy, right? Do what you want to do. I will explain the positives of adopting an older dog and why it's a great thing to do. But I'm not going to try to change people's minds in that situation. I'm just going to give them all their options, and then they can go from there. And if I can help them out in any way, I will. If they say, I want to adopt a 1-year-old German Shepherd, I'm like, okay, I'm friends with the folks over at German Shepherd Rescue New Jersey, or I'm still friends with the folks at Garden State. Here are a couple dogs that they have that are younger. Go apply with them. Sounds like you guys could be a good match. People are going to change their mind or not change their mind. You just need to give them the facts and allow them to make the decision that they ultimately are going to make. Even when I'm working with folks, and sometimes they'll ask me, like, is this the right dog for me? I've learned the hard way to give them the pluses and minuses and not say, oh, no, you shouldn't have that dog. Or if you have two dogs that are fighting, right? I'll say, okay, it's my opinion based on all the information that I've seen in my experience, but feel free to get another opinion, right? Like I had a guy that had two Rottweilers, and there's no way those Rottweilers were going to live together. And I didn't tell him the whole, here's my recommendation, but here's another trainer that might have a different opinion if you feel you want to keep the dogs. And he said, oh, I got this other trainer, and the dogs are great together. And I was like, okay, yeah, that's good. I'm glad you found the other trainer. Meanwhile, the guy's got a 3-year-old kid, and he's got two Rottweilers about to bite each other. I thought maybe it'd be better if they separated them. But again, ultimately, listen to people. A lot of times they'll tell you where they're really going anyway, and you just got to help them get there.
How much training do you have to do for your rescue dogs when they come in? Do you have to start all over and retrain them all to ready them, or what do you do?
Not too much. Most of the dogs are like 5 or 6 years old, or sometimes 10 years old, so they're set in their ways. Usually the most we have to do is train them to walk a little bit nicer on a leash, or just refresh them on how to do proper housebreaking protocols. Sometimes they can settle into a house and become a little possessive, and then we'll help them to make sure that there's boundaries, and the shepherd understands that it's not their job to determine who's coming in or out of the house. But we don't do as much training as you might think because the dogs are older.
I was going to say, so you had talked about some of the advantages. So what would you say for us uninitiated people, what are some of the advantages of adopting a senior dog?
They seem to know that they got this last chance in life. And again, yes, I understand that's humanizing the dog a little bit. But when you've rescued enough senior dogs, you start to see that. The dogs are very resilient. So they will bond with you a lot faster than you think they will. They're low maintenance for the most part. Yes, the last year or so, there's health issues, but it's just it's an easier transition into the house. And I just get so much out of knowing that I gave a chance or an opportunity for a dog that was probably going to get euthanized or be stuck in a kennel for the next 2 years, or a shelter for the next 2 years of their life. It gives meaning. I think it can give a lot of meaning to people, which is also another reason why we do have an age limit to contact us. We certainly don't say, oh, if you're 76 years old, you can't adopt, because it can give a lot of meaning to an older person as well. We had a foster. She was 90 years old. And I know it sounds crazy. There's a lot of support for her. And she fostered one of our dogs who was unadoptable because that dog was 12 and a half. And it was beautiful. They just had a great relationship for the last, I think, 8 months of the dog's life, and gave her a purpose and a meaning to get up in the morning and help another animal out.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of interesting. I got a little emotional just thinking about it.
Right.
And I would assume, I know you said with humanizing a little bit, but if you had gone from being in a home, and let's say you had gone into a kennel and you were a dog, and then you have something that you have a chance to get into, and you were getting into a home, I think that's something that would be in their abilities to comprehend. Let's put it that way, without trying to humanize dogs too much.
Well, dogs are pack animals, right? So they need to be in a pack, right? They need a home and people or their pack that they belong to. A kennel doesn't necessarily lend itself to that, I wouldn't think. Isolation in your own cage where they visit you, basically jail, right? So it's dog jail. But yeah, and you know what? Humans need their pack too, right? Mm-hmm. You know what? If you can match those two up, what a great idea. Do you have a different way of running your training business as opposed to how the nonprofit is run?
I think I'm a little more emotionally involved in the rescue. And I think my storytelling as you've heard over this time, will steer a little bit more towards pulling at the heartstrings. Whereas with training, it's not so much that it's a job per se, but I'm going in there and I have specific goals that we're trying to meet. I always try to have a good relationship with whoever I'm training. It's always great because you never know if you're going to run into people later on and they'll get second dogs and all. From the rescue perspective, like I said, I think I'm a little bit more emotionally involved from the compelling story, telling a compelling story from that end.
Well, we're getting close here to the end of the hour, James. Or any kind of what do you say is the biggest things that maybe you've learned going through this process over the years of being a trainer? I know you've involved your stoicism. By the way, James has shared quite a bit of stoicism with me. Thank goodness, because it's helped me out about quite a bit also.
And don't always be orthodox. And so, as an example, and this was actually through training via rescue. I trained this dog, the dude, and he was a mix. He was like this kind of weird Rottweiler or a Shepherd, a much like Heinz 57 dog. Nice dog. Had some little quirks about him. And it was a younger couple. They ended up splitting, and the guy kept the dude for a little bit, but he couldn't. He had to move out too. And there's no rescue wanted to take him. And he knew I did rescue. So I took him in, even though he wasn't a German Shepherd. And we had him for a while. I was very attached to the dude. It's a great dog. But the longer we had him, some of the quirks that I had been hired for started to pop themselves up again. And he was not really an adoptable dog. But I'd always kept in touch with the dude's owner. A lot of rescues will be, oh, you surrender the dog to us, that's it. We're never talking to you again. You're never going to know what happened to your dog. It's like getting adopted. But I try to keep in touch with people as much as possible. So the owner and I, we always kept in touch. And eventually he got his own place out in Washington. And there's no way we were going to be able to get the dude adopted. He just had some behavioral issues that wouldn't lend itself. And once he got settled in Washington, we talked for a long time. And we ended up adopting the dude back out to him. It was a long story, but the short end of it is I arranged transportation. I drove the dude part of the way. I met the transport guy, passed off the dude. Tears were coming down my eyes. It's like, oh, he's kissing me and stuff. And yeah, the dude made it back to his owner out in Washington State. Spent 2 years there. And then the dude and his owner came back to New Jersey and lived happily ever after. And I can tell you 99% of the rescues would never do something like that. And I don't say that to pat myself on the back. I say that to be open to what's the best solution for everybody. And even though, yes, he did originally give up the dog, he loved that dog. And I knew if he got the dog back, that he would do everything that he could to keep him. I think in rescue, you have to be open-minded and look for the solutions, right? Don't let perfect be the enemy of good.
I think that's an important point, is why not keep those kind of lines of communication open? Again, it loops back to your judgmental piece. Oh, you give up a dog, then you're a person non grata. Right. Here you go. You had a relationship with this dog, and who knows what their situation was that caused them to give it up. Keeping that relationship, I think, is key. So that's a good one to share with people. Keep those lines of communication open. You just never know what can possibly come out of it.
I have one more question, because it just occurred to me that even though you're the founder of your nonprofit, you're not actually serving as the president of your nonprofit. So
right.
That's curious, because that's actually unusual. I work with the founders, and because they have the heart for it and they start it, they're typically the ones out in front. So how did that roll down? And because that's unique.
I was the president for a long time. And I felt we needed to just change things up a little bit to get a different voice. My friend Lisa, I felt she could do a great job as president, bring some new ideas in. It would free me up to try to do some of the other back end work I enjoy, but I just didn't really have time to do. It also, I felt, would get us a little bit in a different and a good enough structure to help fundraising, especially to try to get grants. So we tightened up our board members and the officers as well. And it was a challenge to me. I wanted to challenge myself. Can I trust somebody else to be president of something that I hold so dear to my heart? And I can. I admit there's moments, and sometimes Lisa would like defer to me and start asking me questions, and I just go, "Hey, Lisa, you're the president. make the decision. And then as long as it's in accordance with everything we're doing, just let me know. And she knows I will always back her no matter what she does. So it's been liberating. And I enjoy the fact that I'm doing the treasurer work, but also, like I said, it gives me the opportunity to just take a step back and focus on a few side projects that just never were really getting done.
I loved hearing what you have to say. And if you're an A Squared member, you're going to hear a few bonus minutes after we're done here. But I know Chris is going to want to wrap this up with some final thoughts for our public listeners. I've been just keeping notes like crazy because that's what I do. You talked about not over administrating, and I have Post-it notes everywhere. So it's going to be written down. But I've been just writing down all these leadership nuggets that you've been dropping throughout the conversation, just very organically. And I just wanted to go through them as my kind of summary of what I've gotten out of this before I kick it over to Chris to bring us out. But you talked a lot about leadership consistency.
Right.
What you learned is constant changeovers don't help your organization. So keep consistency. Relationship vetting for volunteers, for other people, getting to know them. Focus on the relationship first before you start putting them to work so that you get to know who they are and where they need to be. Trust. You talked a lot about trust, trusting your leadership, trusting other people that you're working with, trusting the volunteers, trusting staff, that sort of thing. You talked about communication and using neutral terminology when you're communicating so people don't feel judged or antipathy for you. Yeah, demeaned. Yeah. Also, in this one I wrote a star next to because it's what I tend to do. It's don't over-administrate procedures. Mm-hmm. You got to leave space for the kismet. Definitely. Right? So I love that. Boundaries. Have training boundaries when you're working with people. Again, that's building in some space for them to be who they are and connect with you differently. And Chris had a lot to say about that too. I just wrote it that way. You also gave a couple of examples, which I thought was great. You need to be, another leadership factor is being humble enough to fix things and being humble enough to grow. So when you make a mistake, humble yourself, call the guy back. Look, I screwed up. Sorry, I had a bad day. That's not who I am. Let's fix this. And also being humble enough to say, hey, why don't you be the president of my pet project? Sure. Okay, I'm on again. And then the last one, it just comes through to me is just lead with your heart and where your heart is. I feel that the nonprofit I work in is just, if your heart's not there, there's something missing. And so when you're passionate about something, just that leading with your heart doesn't mean being emotive all the time, but it does mean that it shapes your decisions and the extra mile you go to do stuff. So I love that. I resonated with all of it. And I do have some challenges for myself personally, but thank you for sharing all of that. Chris?
This is great.
Well, that's the whole idea really is, look, you can talk to a CEO of a Fortune 500 company. You can talk to someone who is a rescue and has background like Jim has in philosophy, and you can learn things from them. And the biggest thing I always get away from Jim is he loves dogs, and that comes across. And if he meets other people who love dogs and then can also work together, then that's where the magic really happens. Right? You have to share that same foundation, that same enthusiasm or vision. And then to get people, I would think to stay with the charity or even with any business is really to say, hey, what's our vision for this company? What's our vision for this charity? And what do we want to do? What do we want to do together? And the thing that I actually heard here was maybe the first time I really heard it, and I've spoken to Jim a lot, was the flexibility. And it's such important to know. And I'm gonna bring this back to corporate. And I always talk when I work in manufacturing, and there's always this competition between quality and manufacturing. So quality is what I always consider like the acolytes. They're like, everything must be this way, and this is the rigid, and they have to be, and you want them to be that way. But there also has to be a little bit of flexibility, because if you're so rigid that you never get your product out the door that is potentially going to help people, then that's a problem. So you have to understand what are the clear boundaries and what are some of the things that are a little more flexible within your organization. And I think Jim defined it really well, and it just happened to be around his dog rescue and his passion project. So I think that's really important for people to learn and take away from it. Jim, as always, thank you.
Awesome.
Always great talking with you. And I like the fact that you were able to work in some stoicism. That really made me happy.
Also, my t-shirt. This is my dog, by the way, Phoenix. Nothing says German like a shepherd.
I should have worn the shirt. I didn't. I had my brother, just a kind of a weird side note, has really wanted one of Jim's shirts that he has, like a tie-dyed shirts that are really fantastic. And I should have worn that, but unfortunately my brother's not here. That would have been good if I had the tie-dyed Sedona Shepherd.
Man, we're going to uniforms now, Chris. I'm
just saying.
I don't want to be the only one without my shirt.
I think that would have been rather funny, though. Like, why am I the odd person out here? All right, everyone, thank you so much for joining us on this podcast. I hope you got as much out of it as we did. James, again, thank you for showing, and Susan, again, thank you for all your insight also. Please be sure to stay on board for our other content if you're an A Squared member, and if you're interested in learning more about it, of course, go to our website. And thank you again. Bye. Hi, this is Chris, podcast team coordinator for A Squared Lamp Groups. Thank you for listening and subscribing to the Stop Digging Community Podcast. Keep the conversation going. Search for the Stop Digging group on LinkedIn, and don't miss out on our next episode.